You're listening to Parents, You've Got This, the expert guide to parenthood. The complete guide to pregnancy, birth, baby and parenthood.
Becoming a new parent is arguably one of the biggest challenges that we'll ever face in our lifetime. This week on the Expert Guide to Parenthood podcast, we're going to be talking all about navigating the transition to parenthood.
We are joined by psychologist Dr Carrie Hayward, who is going to share her more than 16 years of experience in working with people to achieve the best outcomes for themselves. We are so lucky to have her today. She is also the author of a book, Being Human. She is a mother of 3. She has gone through this transition herself, and we're very grateful to her for her insights and expertise today. Thank you for joining us, Carrie.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Oh. Now, sometimes when we decide that we want to start this journey to parenthood, it might not go to plan, or sometimes we might not know if we're ready or we're not ready. Can you talk to us a little bit about the decision to start a family and those sort of that period between deciding that and actually having one? It can be so different for so many people.
Well, yeah, that's probably what I was about to say. It varies a lot. I think in terms of readiness, look, it's different for everybody. We can be talking about readiness in terms of situationally, where we are in life. There's other factors that come into that, where we're at with our career. For some people, financial factors come into that, and, living, house, but also emotional readiness as well. And so it really does, differ for everybody in terms of where they feel like they need to be in their life to feel ready. But I think one of the most important factors in that, particularly when it comes to emotional readiness, is that we're not necessarily always going to feel completely ready.
Yes. Yeah. So let's talk about some of those big feelings. When you're pregnant, you can start to, feel some big feelings about the transition. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's typical in regard to what you can expect?
Well, I think it's human nature, isn't it? When anything is uncertain or unfamiliar, the mind's not very good with that. And so it's our nature to actually experience a lot of nervousness around that. Because so much is unknown and different. And I think another big factor that comes into it is, particularly with pregnancy, people love sharing their pregnancy stories. And so there's often a lot that people will hear about from friends or family, and then expectations get set in terms of what they think it might be like. We often hear a lot of the more difficult stories and the difficult things that come up. So I really do, speak to mums in particular a lot about just making sure there's not those expectations. Everybody's experience is very different, and that whole kind of nobody ever told you this that we hear again and again and again. Nobody ever told you, so I'm going to tell you. But possibly people haven't told them that because that's not everybody's experience. So I think, and that can increase a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the nervousness, and that comes into obviously the readiness as well. So just being able to really allow our own experience to evolve and not get too far ahead. Sort of being able to just deal with what is our experience for this moment today is a big part. Yeah.
I think I was ready to get pregnant, but I don't know if I was ready to have a baby, and I was certainly not ready to have a child. It's like the journey keeps changing too, and everybody's journeys seem to change at different times. And so, like you say, you just have to forge your own path, right? And just tune into your own experience.
And I think, Freya, what you're referring to there is there's so much focus on getting pregnant that you're not necessarily then thinking about the next step. When pregnancy hits, like, oh, okay, now I need to think about pregnancy. And then you're not necessarily thinking about once the child is here. And so to a degree, that's actually really helpful because, as I said, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But it can mean we hit the next stage and go, oh, my goodness, I haven't actually thought about what this means to now actually have my baby in my arms or whatever it might be.
And so what are some sort of strategies that people can use to help to deal with the overwhelm? If they're finding like these feelings are just too much, it's all too confronting, it's all too new. What are some of the strategies that people can draw on to help them?
Well, I think normalising the emotional experience of that's probably really important, because it's, again, human nature to really struggle with whatever we are feeling in terms of emotionally and discomfort in our body. And so the acceptance piece around that's really important. And then in terms of, then coping with that, managing with that day to day, Look, obviously we've got a lot of practices that come in really handy with that. Mindfulness is a big one. The more formal practice of mindfulness meditation can be really helpful. And then just, making sure we're keeping up with our typical self-care behaviours that we know help us. So whether that might be exercise, whether that might be, making sure we're still seeing friends and socialising, whether that be making sure we've got downtime. But yes, and then there's, even the behavioural things that we can be doing as well, which is making sure, we have order, as much order, because overwhelm typically comes from feeling like there's a lot going on and there's sort of chaos out here, and out here is very reflective of in here. So if we can actually create order out here in whichever way we can and works for us, and that can actually help with our internal experience as well. So there are many things we can do, and it's just probably knowing what works for ourselves before pregnancy. What usually works for me is probably going to work for me now as well.
Yeah, that's so true. I think it is chaotic, isn't it, becoming a new parent, like having a baby that, has its own mind and can start crying and can go to sleep and not go to sleep. And when you don't know what it's going to do, that does cause a lot of anxiety, particularly for people that have had professional careers and they can get up early and get organised and put some things into place to know how their day is going to unfold. And I think that's sort of one of the tricky parts. So how long does it typically take for people to get used to becoming a parent? When do you start to feel like, oh, yeah, I've got this?
That's probably really varied too. And look, it depends a lot. It depends a lot on how the baby's also settling as well, and sleep's obviously a big factor in that, and that's a really hard one because we can't fully control. That's a big part of the problem. But I guess, once there is a little bit more familiarity, I guess, in what we're experiencing as a new parent, and there's there's the sort of environmental situational factors that help with that when we sort of get back to our own environment, and if, there's people around us that are able to help, and that's what, works for us, and that can be really helpful as well. But look, I think typically, and hormonally, there's a big part of that too. So we know that our hormones do start to settle sort of after the first few weeks. So I think it's recognising that and knowing that it will happen. We will start to very quickly get into this new life of ours, and all of a sudden kind of think, I don't actually remember what it was like not to now be a parent, not to have a baby. And there's something really comforting in that. So we do get there.
Yeah. And what about our relationships? So obviously it changes us, in terms of our daily life and our role and, the way that we see ourselves sometimes. As to it can change the nature of our relationships, I guess. Obviously, if we're sleep deprived, it's hard. Our time is now split. Our heart is split, in another direction. What are some strategies and some tips for helping parents to navigate, maintaining really healthy relationships through the highs and lows and, the initial struggles of becoming a parent?
Absolutely. And you've just touched on, I think, what is one of the key transitional things we experience in our relationship, as you say, that suddenly we've gone from our attention to be very much on each other to then suddenly it's now sort of diverted to this, and it's shared. It's this beautiful shared experience, obviously, but there is a change in our attention. So yes, it's our time is split, as you say. Our heart is now doing different things, but our attention is also split. Yeah, and I think our attention is actually the key piece there, because the other ones we can't control too much. Our attention we can. And so we actually always theoretically have control over where our attention is. And if we can remember that, and also remember that even just the smallest conscious, choiceful changes in where we move our attention can be really big. And so because we don't necessarily have as much time with each other, it's okay. We don't actually need huge amounts of time to still remain connected to our partners. And if we can find small, simple ways of still maintaining that connection and attention, and that might just be through really simple gestures, like making sure I'm still just putting my arm around my partner, or kissing them hello or goodbye, or a simple just touch as I'm walking past. Those really small, simple gestures are actually huge, because it's us choosing to give our attention to the other person still. And
that's beautiful.
Yeah, and that's key.
I know. I remember when my husband used to run in the door to kiss me hello, and then once we had Hope, he ran in to kiss Hope, and I remember thinking, oh my
I'm
still here. Or he'd be like, how did Hope go today? How did I go today? And that's when I realised, oh gosh, I really am one step down the ladder now, and then I had 4 more until you're down to But it is right, those simple things of kissing hello make you feel like you're seen and loved.
Yeah. So the power in the small.
And so you mentioned there before, about trying to find time for yourself. How do you actually do that when you've got a baby that needs you 24/7, and particularly if you're breastfeeding or, how do you get away to find that sort of inner relief?
Well, I think it's interesting you say the 24/7 because they don't actually nurse 24/7 in the sense that there are times when they are asleep. Yes. There are times when they are settled, even if they're awake. There are those times. But the reason why I picked up on that is because if we tell ourselves that I have this little person that needs me 24 hours a day, that's overwhelming.
Yes, it is.
That's really overwhelming. So if we can actually reframe that and go, yes, of course, this little person is so dependent on me, and there's something beautiful about that. At the same time, there are pockets in the day that I can bring my attention back to me. And if, again, we can really simplify that and make it small and find just the small moments of, okay, baby's okay right now. It's okay for me to bring my attention back to me, because I experience a lot of mothers who then feel guilty about that and think they have to be. I can't possibly look at my phone or watch TV or do anything when my baby's here. And again, experience a lot of guilt around that. But we actually need those moments, because it's actually knowing that we still have those moments for ourselves that's important, as actually having those moments for ourselves. So in summary, finding the small pockets of time, and whether that be when they're asleep, even when they're feeding.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful to still be, and again, I actually talk about making sure we're really present with that at times, at moments. But if the baby's on us for 20 minutes, we can spend half that time really focused and connected on this bonding experience, and then half of the time maybe back on wherever I need to be for me. And so it's being really flexible with that. And knowing that if I'm taking care of that for me, it's actually good for my baby at the same time.
That's such good advice.
That's really beautiful, Carrie. It's quite normal, especially in the early stages after having a baby, to feel low and to experience the baby blues. Can we talk about some strategies for lifting our mood that new parents might like to try if they're feeling a little bit flat?
Yeah. So absolutely. It's so typical in those early days, and again, that's so hormonal related.
Yes.
So again, if we can really normalise that, I remember a friend saying to me with my first, just expect day 3 might be a little bit all over the shop. I think she even prepared my partner that Carrie might be a little bit emotional day 3. So again, if we can really, normalising is such a big part of our human experience, and so it takes away a lot of the struggle with it. And then it's probably, again, really whatever we need. And so if it is we need just a little bit more, rest, and we can have our partner or family or whoever step in to just, again, small pockets of time to take baby. Any, obviously, self-care, self-nurturing practices that we can sprinkle tiny bits in the juggle of it all. And then just being patient, I think, and knowing it will pass. Again, that's probably a big part. And not when we talk about staying positive, I think it's allowing for the mixed and variability in what we may feel, and, even thoughts that might be coming up. So it's okay if a lot of those thoughts and feelings are still uncomfortable and maybe still a little bit hard or negative. We can't control a lot of that. But again, it's entirely natural. But at the same time, we can have other experiences too, but it's not with the exclusion of the hard stuff. So we can try and bring attention to what's really beautiful and joyful about this experience at the same time as the hard stuff. It's not an either-or experience.
Because I think sometimes the guilt of feeling sad is such a big part of it too. And you're right, letting go and actually letting them both coexist is really really key.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why people tell us what they did experience that was bad, because they felt like I wasn't prepared. And if I just prepare this person, then they're not going to feel as bad. When it happens to them, they're going to think that that's normal. But when do you sort of realise that the baby blues are more than the baby blues? Maybe we talk a little bit about what the baby blues are, some of the feelings that you will potentially have with that hormone shift, and then when to maybe potentially seek help if you think this is too much.
Look, I think typically speaking, the baby blues, it's a more mild version of a more sort of what we would see as a depressive experience, so a more mild version of that kind of emotional variability. And often it is probably a more, we might experience sort of a bit more distress. So we might experience a little bit of sadness and certainly be upset. Look, there'll still be a low mood that can exist with that. And as I said, it's typically in those first few weeks. Yeah. It's when it starts to then linger and become a bit more enduring, and probably when that starts to our mood actually starts to really then drop to a point where our functioning can actually get impacted. So I guess what's really important there is, again, differentiating between what we feel and how we're functioning.
Yes. Okay.
So it's one thing to have all of these emotional experiences but still be functioning okay.
Yeah.
Still feel like, I can get through this, and I can do what the baby needs and what I need and everything else. But it's when we start to feel like actually that's becoming really hard.
Yes.
That's where it's possibly becoming more of a depressive experience that we might need to get some help for.
Oh, I was like that. I was very happy, but I couldn't stop crying. Like, I know someone would come around and just start crying. I think, what the hell am I crying for? Like, I'm actually really happy.
I promise I'm fine.
Yeah, and everyone kept saying, like, you sure she's all right? But I was just like, then it just went away. It was just like I just was. But also, too, I think when you're really tired, sometimes that can mask a depressive feeling. You're just actually really tired.
Absolutely.
And your body just can't really cope, with being so tired, don't you find?
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that, because that's a really important factor. If we're not getting a lot of sleep, of course we're not going to be feeling up ourselves. Yeah. And so, again, if we can just normalise it like that and go, well, I'm going to be feeling this because I'm exhausted. Yeah. And again, knowing that will change.
Yeah.
If all of those factors, like, we are sleeping okay, everything sort of seems to be sort of settled, and we're still feeling quite low, then that's probably, again, where we would get it looked at, get some help, speak to someone about it. Yeah.
And so what does that look like, in terms of getting help? What are the first steps? There's amazing resources like Panda. Is it calling a psychologist like yourself, going to see a GP? What would someone's first step be?
Yeah, look, I think typically GP is always a great start. We can do a little bit of searching. We've got to be careful not to self-diagnose too much. It's that maybe a little bit's okay, because that can be comforting if we're hearing about other people's experiences and that sort of thing. But yeah, to make sure you do see a professional. A GP, as I said, is a great first point of call, and then they can talk to you about what might be going on, and then therefore what might help in terms of seeing a professional like a psychologist. A lot of people do end up seeing a therapist or a psychologist that might be recommended through a friend. So again, talking to friends can be great, because typically someone says, go and see so-and-so, or which is always a really nice way to sort of move into that, particularly if you've never seen a professional in that way before.
Yeah, and it can be hard, isn't it? Because sometimes you think, if I admit that I'm not coping, am I not a good parent? And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that people feel, that we should be a good parent, but why should you? You've never done it before, and so I think there's a lot of pressure on ourselves to be the perfect parent. And so if we're feeling then sad, or we're not feeling ourselves, we feel like, I'm not coping. But sometimes, reaching out is the bravest thing that you could ever possibly do. Right. That is being a good parent, recognising that I'm not feeling great.
100%. And as I say to people who come and see me all the time, that there's so much that can be benefited from increasing our self-awareness and optimising our experience through seeing a professional or getting some strategies or help in any way, not just because there's something wrong.
No. Yes.
So even though we are talking about it obviously in that context at the moment, I think in terms of any guilt or does this mean I'm not coping coming up, why wouldn't we actually want to get some support or help, or, as I said, to just be able to optimise, and so I can get the most out of this experience. And so, again, a reframing can sometimes be helpful with that.
Yeah, well, that's so helpful, Carrie. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise today. It's going to help so many people that are making this transition. Such important information. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Great to chat.
You've been listening to the Expert Guide to Parenthood podcast. Never forget, parents, you've got this.
Join a Parents You've Got This masterclass today to be prepared, excited and educated for pregnancy, birth, baby and parenthood. Visit www.parentsyou'vegotthis.com.au and sign up for a masterclass today.